It's a very welcome addition.
The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Chairman, can I first of all acknowledge the Minister and say how admirable it is to have such a high level of education and understanding about so many matters of the world, but still to be able to speak in language that the rest of us can understand. It's such an admirable quality. Very few people in that position have it. I want to make a brief contribution to part two as well. One of the debates was at the Select Committee was about not just the role of the Remuneration Authority but also about the size of it and the competency of the members, and that it was not in any way to challenge the competency of any of the existing members but really to look at what mix of skills might be required on the Remuneration Authority. And it's my recollection that the Select Committee made a small amendment to it by lopping one of the proposed new members off it and retaining it at the current size, and I think that was a good decision. I share the view of my colleague who's just resumed his seat, Chris Hipkins, that actually we should have a much higher level of penalty on members of Parliament who have been elected to be representatives either of their constituencies or their party as members of this Parliament who don't bother to show up. I find that immensely frustrating. All of us of course, would like to stay in our electorates or in our home areas at various times, but being in Parliament, and not just being here physically, but actually being a participant in Parliament, is why we were elected. And that's what we should always face up to as being a fundamental part of our responsibility. The previous regime let us off far too lightly, and I actually think that we could go a little further than this, but it's a good step forward in the right direction. I think the idea of microchipping members of Parliament and having GPS trackers on us throughout, what harm would be done? I'm sure it would provide both other members of Parliament. It would certainly provide the media with a lot of additional copy to prepare, I'm sure. But on a serious note, members of the public know that we get very well paid for the role that we undertake as their elected representatives, and the very least we can do is make sure that we turn up at the appropriate time. So having a penalty provision, firstly for people who just don't show up for legitimate reasons, and of course there are reasons that are legitimate when a Member of Parliament might not be physically in the chamber at any particular time, or indeed in the precincts of Parliament, but also we've got provisions for people if they are suspended from the House. I think that a deduction of salary is entirely appropriate, and I'm very pleased that we introduced those stronger AWOL provisions.
Thank
you, Mr Chair. I just want to make a brief call on this part. We also agree with the changes to the AWOL